Chapter 51. Pyramus and Thisbe. About two-thirds of the way along the Faubourg Saint-Honoré, and in the rear of one of the most imposing mansions in this rich neighbourhood, where the various houses vie with each other for elegance of design and magnificence of construction, extended a large garden, where the wide-spreading chestnut trees raised their heads high above the walls in a solid rampart, and with the coming of every spring scattered a shower of delicate pink and white blossoms into the large stone vases that stood upon the two square pilasters of a curiously wrought iron gate that dated from the time of Louis XII. This noble entrance, however, in spite of its striking appearance and the graceful effect of the geraniums planted in the two vases as they waved their variegated leaves in the wind and charmed the eye with their scarlet bloom, had fallen into utter disuse. The proprietors of the mansion had many years before thought it best to confine themselves to the possession of the house itself, with its thickly planted courtyard opening into the Faubourg Saint-Honoré, and to the garden shut in by this gate, which formerly communicated with a fine kitchen garden of about an acre. For the demon of speculation drew a line, or in other words projected a street, at the farther side of the kitchen garden. The street was laid out, a name was chosen, and posted up on an iron plate, but before construction was begun it occurred to the possessor of the property that a handsome sum might be obtained for the ground then devoted to fruits and vegetables by building along the line of the proposed street, and so making it a branch of communication with the Faubourg Saint-Honoré itself, one of the most important thoroughfares in the city of Paris. In matters of speculation, however, though man proposes, money disposes. From some such difficulty the newly named street died almost in birth, and the purchaser of the kitchen garden, having paid a high price for it and being quite unable to find anyone willing to take his bargain off his hands without a considerable loss, yet still clinging to the belief that at some future day he should obtain a sum for it that would repay him, not only for his past outlay, but also the interest upon the capital locked up in his new acquisition, contented himself with letting the ground temporarily to some market gardeners at a yearly rental of 500 francs. And so, as we have said, the iron gate leading into the kitchen garden had been closed up and left to rust, which bade fair before long to eat of its hinges, while to prevent the ignoble glances of the diggers and delvers of the ground from presuming to sully the aristocratic enclosure belonging to the mansion, the gate had been boarded up to a height of 6 feet. True, the planks were not so closely adjusted but that a hasty peep might be obtained through their interstices, but the strict decorum and rigid propriety of the inhabitants of the house left no grounds for apprehending that advantage would be taken of that circumstance. Horticulture seemed, however, to have been abandoned in the deserted kitchen garden, and where cabbages, carrots, radishes, peas, and melons had once flourished, a scanty crop of lucerne alone bore evidence of its being deemed worthy of cultivation. A small low door gave egress from the walled space we have been describing into the projected street, the ground having been abandoned as unproductive by its various renters, and had now fallen so completely in general estimation as to return not even the 1/2% it had originally paid. Toward the house, the chestnut trees we have before mentioned rose high above the wall without in any way affecting the growth of other luxuriant shrubs and flowers that eagerly dressed forward to fill up the vacant spaces, as though asserting their right to enjoy the boon of light and air. At one corner, where the foliage became so thick as almost to shut out day, a large stone bench and sundry rustic seats indicated that this sheltered spot was either in general favour or particular use by some inhabitant of the house, which was faintly discernible through the dense mass of verdure that partially concealed it, though situated but 100 paces off. Whoever had selected this retired portion of the grounds as the boundary of a walk or as a place for meditation was abundantly justified in the choice by the absence of all glare, the cool, refreshing shade, the screen it afforded from the scorching rays of the sun that found no entrance there, even during the burning days of hottest summer, the incessant and melodious warbling of birds, and the entire removal from either the noise of the street or the bustle of the mansion. On the evening of one of the warmest days spring had yet bestowed on the inhabitants of Paris might be seen negligently thrown upon the stone bench a book, a parasol, and a work-basket, from which hung a partly embroidered cambric handkerchief, while at a little distance from these articles was a young woman standing close to the iron gate, endeavouring to discern something on the other side by means of the openings in the planks. The earnestness of her attitude, and the fixed gaze with which she seemed to seek the object of her wishes, proving how much her feelings were interested in the matter. At that instant, the little side gate leading from the waste ground to the street was noiselessly opened, and a tall, powerful young man appeared. He was dressed in a common grey blouse and velvet cap, but his carefully arranged hair, beard, and moustache, all of the richest and glossiest black, ill accorded with his plebeian attire. After casting a rapid glance around him, in order to assure himself that he was unobserved, he entered by the small gate, and carefully closing and securing it after him, proceeded with a hurried step towards the barrier. At the sight of him she expected, though probably not in such a costume, the young woman started in terror and was about to make a hasty retreat. But the eye of love had already seen, even through the narrow chinks of the wooden palisades, the movement of the white robe, and observed the fluttering of the blue sash. Pressing his lips close to the planks, he exclaimed, "Don't be alarmed, Valentine, it is I." Again the timid girl found courage to return to the gate, saying as she did so, "And why do you come so late today? It is almost dinner time, and I had to use no little diplomacy to get rid of my watchful mother-in-law, my too devoted maid, and my troublesome brother, who is always teasing me about coming to work at my embroidery, which I am in a fair way never to get done. So pray excuse yourself, as well as you can, for having made me wait, and after that, tell me why I see you in a dress so singular that at first I did not recognize you." "Dearest Valentine," said the young man, "the difference between our respective stations makes me fear to offend you by speaking of my love, but yet I cannot find myself in your presence without longing to pour forth my soul and tell you how fondly I adore you. If it be but to carry away with me the recollection of such sweet moments, I could even thank you for chiding me, for it leaves me a gleam of hope that if you did not expect me, and that indeed would be worse than vanity to suppose, at least I was in your thoughts. You asked me the cause of my being late, and why I come disguised. I will candidly explain the reason of both, and I trust to your goodness to pardon me. I have chosen a trade." "A trade? Oh, Maximilian, how can you jest at a time when we have such deep cause for uneasiness?" "Heaven keep me from jesting with that which is far dearer to me than life itself. But listen to me, Valentine, and I will tell you all about it. I became weary of ranging fields and scaling walls, and seriously alarmed at the idea suggested by you that if caught hovering about here, your father would very likely have me sent to prison as a thief. That would compromise the honor of the French army, to say nothing of the fact that the continual presence of a captain of Spahis in a place where no warlike projects could be supposed to account for it might well create surprise. So I have become a gardener, and consequently adopted the costume of my calling." "What excessive nonsense you talk, Maximilian!" "Nonsense? Pray do not call what I consider the wisest action of my life by such a name. Consider, by becoming a gardener, I effectually screen our meetings from all suspicion or danger." "I beseech you, Maximilian, to cease trifling, and tell me what you really mean." "Simply, that having ascertained that the piece of ground on which I stand was to let, I made application for it, was readily accepted by the proprietor, and am now master of this fine crop of lucerne. Think of that, Valentine. There is nothing now to prevent my building myself a little hut on my plantation, and residing not 20 yards from you. Only imagine what happiness that would afford me. I can scarcely contain myself at the bare idea. Such felicity seems above all price, as a thing impossible and unattainable. But would you believe that I purchase all this delight, joy, and happiness, for which I would cheerfully have surrendered 10 years of my life, at the small cost of 500 francs per annum, paid quarterly? Henceforth we have nothing to fear. I am on my own ground, and have an undoubted right to place a ladder against the wall, and to look over when I please, without having any apprehensions of being taken off by the police as a suspicious character. I may also enjoy the precious privilege of assuring you of my fond, faithful, and unalterable affection whenever you visit your favourite bower, unless, indeed, it offends your pride to listen to professions of love from the lips of a poor working-man, clad in a blouse and cap. A faint cry of mingled pleasure and surprise escaped from the lips of Valentine, who almost instantly said, in a saddened tone, as though some envious cloud darkened the joy which illumined her heart, "Alas, no, Maximilian, this must not be, for many reasons. We should presume too much on our own strength, and, like others, perhaps be led astray by our blind confidence in each other's prudence." "How can you for an instant entertain so unworthy a thought, dear Valentine? Have I not, from the first blessed hour of our acquaintance, schooled all my words and actions to your sentiments and ideas? And you have, I am sure, the fullest confidence in my honour. When you spoke to me of experiencing a vague and indefinite sense of coming danger, I placed myself blindly and devotedly at your service, asking no other reward than the pleasure of being useful to you. And have I ever since, by word or look, given you cause of regret for that having selected me from the numbers that would willingly have sacrificed their lives for you? You told me, my dear Valentine, that you were engaged to Monsieur d'Épinay, and that your father was resolved upon completing the match, and that from his will there was no appeal, as Monsieur de Villefort was never known to change a determination once formed. I kept in the background, as you wished, and waited, not for the decision of your heart or my own, but hoping that Providence would graciously interpose in our behalf, and order events in our favour. But what cared I for delays or difficulties, Valentine, as long as you confessed that you loved me, and took pity on me? If you will only repeat that avowal now and then, I can endure anything." "Ah, Maximilian, that is the very thing that makes you so bold, and which renders me at once so happy and unhappy, that I frequently ask myself whether it is better for me to endure the harshness of my mother-in-law and her blind preference for her own child, or to be, as I now am, insensible to any pleasure save such as I find in these meetings, so fraught with danger to both." "I will not admit that word," returned the young man. "It is at once cruel and unjust. Is it possible to find a more submissive slave than myself? You have permitted me to converse with you for time to time, Valentine, but forbidden my ever following you in your walks or elsewhere. Have I not obeyed? And since I found means to enter this enclosure, to exchange a few words with you through the gate, to be close to you without really seeing you, have I ever asked so much as to touch the hem of your gown, or try to pass this barrier, which is but a trifle to one of my youth and strength? Never has a complaint or a murmur escaped me. I have been bound by my promises as rigidly as any knight of olden times. Come, come, dearest Valentine, confess that what I say is true, lest I be tempted to call you unjust." "It is true," said Valentine, as she passed the end of her slender fingers through a small opening in the planks, and permitted Maximilian to press his lips to them. "And
You are a true and faithful friend. But still you acted from motives of self-interest, my dear Maximilian, for you well know that from the moment in which you had manifested an opposite spirit, all would have been ended between us. You promised to bestow on me the friendly affection of a brother, for I have no friend but yourself upon earth, who am neglected and forgotten by my father, harassed and persecuted by my mother-in-law, and left to the sole companionship of a paralyzed and speechless old man, whose withered hand can no longer press mine, and who can speak to me with the eye of alone, although there still lingers in his heart the warmest tenderness for his poor grandchild. Oh, how bitter a fate is mine, to serve either as a victim or an enemy to all who are stronger than myself, while my only friend and supporter is a living corpse. Indeed, Maximilian, I am very miserable, and if you love me, it must be out of pity."
"Valentine," replied the young man, deeply affected, "I will not say you are all I love in the world, for I dearly prize my sister and brother-in-law, but my affection for them is calm and tranquil, in no manner resembling what I feel for you. When I think of you, my heart beats fast, the blood burns in my veins, and I can hardly breathe. But I solemnly promise you to restrain all this ardor, this fervor and intensity of feeling, until you yourself shall require me to render them available in serving or assisting you. Monsieur Franz is not expecting to return home for a year to come, I am told. In that time many favorable and unforeseen chances may befriend us. Let us, then, hope for the best. Hope is so sweet a comforter. Meanwhile, Valentine, while reproaching me with selfishness, think a little what you have been to me, the beautiful but cold resemblance of a marble Venus. What promise of future reward have you made me for all the submission and obedience I have evinced? None whatever. What granted me? Scarcely more. You tell me of Monsieur Franz d'Épinay, your betrothed lover, and you shrink from the idea of being his wife. But tell me, Valentine, is there no other sorrow in your heart? You see me devoted to you, body and soul. My life and each warm drop that circles around my heart are consecrated to your service. You know full well that my existence is bound up in yours, that were I to lose you, I would not outlive the hour of such crushing misery. Yet you speak with calmness of the prospect of your being the wife of another. Oh, Valentine, were I in your place, and did I feel conscious as you do of being worshipped and adored with such a love as mine, 100 times at least should I have passed my hand between those iron bars and said, "Take this hand, dearest Maximilian, and believe that, living or dead, I am yours, yours only and forever." The poor girl made no reply, but her lover could plainly hear her sobs and tears. A rapid change took place in the young man's feelings. "Dearest Valentine," exclaimed he, "forgive me if I have offended you, and forget the words I spoke if you have unwittingly caused you pain." "No, Maximilian, I am not offended," answered she. "But do you not see what a poor helpless being I am, almost a stranger, and an outcast in my father's house, where even he is seldom seen, whose will has been thwarted and spirits broken, from the age of 10 years, beneath the iron rod so sternly held over me, oppressed, mortified, and persecuted, day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute. No person has cared for me, even observed my sufferings, nor have I ever breathed one word on the subject, save to yourself. Outwardly, and in the eyes of the world, I am surrounded by kindness and affection, but the reverse is the case. The general remark is, 'Oh, it cannot be expected that one of so stern a character as Monsieur Villefort
could lavish the tenderness some fathers do on their daughters? What though she has lost her own mother at a tender age, she has had the happiness to find a second mother in Madame de Villefort. The world, however, is mistaken. My father abandons me from utter indifference, while my mother-in-law detests me with a hatred so much the more terrible because it is veiled beneath a continual smile."
"Hate you, sweet Valentine!" exclaimed the young man. "How is it possible for anyone to do that?"
"Alas," replied the weeping girl, "I am obliged to own that my mother-in-law's aversion to me arises from a very natural source, her overweening love for her own child, my brother Edward."
"But why should it?"
"I do not know, but though unwilling to introduce money matters into our present conversation, I would just say this much, that her extreme dislike to me has its origin there, and I much fear she envies me the fortune I enjoy in right of my mother, and which will be more than doubled at the death of Monsieur and Madame de Saint-Méran, whose sole heiress I am. Madame de Villefort has nothing of her own, and hates me for being so richly endowed. Alas, how gladly would I exchange the half of this wealth for the happiness of at least sharing my father's love. God knows, I would prefer sacrificing the whole, so that it would obtain me a happy and affectionate home."
"Poor Valentine!"
"I seem to myself as though living a life of bondage. Yet at the same time am so conscious of my own weakness that I fear to break the restraint on which I am held, lest I fall utterly helpless. Then, too, my father is not a person whose orders may be infringed with impunity, protected as he is by his high position and firmly established reputation for talent and unswerving integrity. No one could oppose him. He is all-powerful even with the king. He would crush you at a word. Dear Maximilian, believe me when I assure you that if I do not attempt to resist my father's commands, it is more on your account than my own."
"But why, Valentine, do you persist in anticipating the worst? Why picture so gloomy a future?"
"Because I judge it from the past."
"Still, consider that although I may not be, strictly speaking, what is termed an illustrious match for you, I am for many reasons not altogether so much beneath your alliance. The days when such distinctions were so nicely weighed and considered no longer exist in France, and the first families of the monarchy have intermarried with those of the empire. The aristocracy of the lance has allied itself with the nobility of the cannon. Now I belong to this last-named class, and certainly my prospects of military preferment are most encouraging as well as certain. My fortune, though small, is free and unfettered, and the memory of my late father is respected in our country, Valentine, as that of the most upright and honourable merchant of the city. I say our country because you were born not far from Marseille."
"Don't speak of Marseille, I beg of you, Maximilian. That one word brings back my mother to my recollection. My angel mother, who died too soon for myself, and all who knew her, but who, after watching over her child during the brief period allotted to her in this world, now, I fondly hope, watches from her home in heaven. Oh, if my mother were still living, there would be nothing to fear, Maximilian, for I would tell her that I loved you, and she would protect us."
"I fear, Valentine," replied the lover, "that were she living, I should never have had the happiness of knowing you. You would then have been too happy to have stooped from your grandeur to bestow a thought on me."
"Now it is you who are unjust, Maximilian," cried Valentine. "But there is one thing I wish to know."
"And what is that?" inquired the young man, perceiving that Valentine hesitated.
"Tell me truly, Maximilian, whether in former days, when our fathers dwelt at Marseille, there was ever any misunderstanding between them."
"Not that I am aware of," replied the young man, "unless, indeed, any ill feeling might have arisen from their being of opposite parties. Your father was, as you know, a zealous partisan of the Bourbons, while mine was wholly devoted to the Emperor. There could not possibly be any other difference between them. But why do you ask?"
"I will tell you," replied the young girl, "for it is but right you should know. Well, on the day when your appointment as an officer of the Legion of Honor was announced in the papers, we were all sitting with my grandfather, Monsieur Noirtier. Monsieur Danglars was there also. You recollect Monsieur Danglars, do you not? Maximilian, the banker whose horses ran away with my mother-in-law and little brother, and very nearly killed them. While the rest of the company were discussing the approaching marriage of Mademoiselle Danglars, I was reading the paper to my grandfather, but when I came to the paragraph about you, although I had done nothing else but read it over to myself all the morning, you know you had told me all about it the previous evening, I felt so happy and yet so nervous at the idea of speaking your name aloud, and before so many people, that I really think I should have passed it over, but for the fear that my doing so might create suspicions as to the cause of my silence. So I summoned up all my courage and read it as firmly and as steadily as I could."
"Dear Valentine!"
"Well, would you believe it? Directly my father caught the sound of your name, he turned round quite hastily, and like a poor silly thing, I was so persuaded that everyone must be as much affected as myself by the utterance of your name that I was not surprised to see my father start and almost tremble, but I even thought, though that surely must have been a mistake, that Monsieur Danglars trembled too." "Morel, Morel!" cried my father. "Stop a bit." Then knitting his brows into a deep frown, he added, "Surely this cannot be one of the Morel family who lived at Marseille and gave us so much trouble from the violent Bonapartism, I mean about the year 1815. "Yes," replied Monsieur Danglars, "I believe he is the son of the old shipowner."
"Indeed," answered Maximilian. "And what did your father say then, Valentine?"
"Oh, such a dreadful thing that I don't dare to tell you."
"Always tell me everything," said Maximilian with a smile.
"Ah," continued my father, still frowning, "their idolized emperor treated these madmen as they deserved. He called them food for powder, which was precisely all they were good for, and I am delighted to see that the present gouvernement have adopted this salutary principle with all its pristine vigour. If Algiers were good for nothing but to furnish the means of carrying so admirable an idea into practice, it would be an acquisition well worthy of struggling to obtain, though it certainly does cost France somewhat dear to assert her rights in that uncivilized country."
"Brutal politics, I must confess," said Maximilian. "But don't attach any serious importance, dear, to what your father said. My father was not a bit behind yours in that sort of talk. Why," said he, "does not the Emperor, who has devised so many clever and efficient modes of improving the art of war, organize a regiment of lawyers, judges, and legal practitioners, sending them in the hottest fire the enemy could maintain, and using them to save better men? You see, my dear, that for picturesque expression and generosity of spirit, there is not much to choose between the language of either party. But what did Monsieur Danglars say to this outburst on the part of the procureur?"
"Oh, he laughed, and in that singular manner so peculiar to himself, half malicious, half ferocious, he almost immediately got up and took his leave. Then, for the first time, I observed the agitation of my grandfather. And I must tell you, Maximilian, that I am the only person capable of discerning emotion in his paralyzed frame. And I suspected, that the conversation that had been carried on in his presence, for they always say and do what they like before the dear old man, without the smallest regard for his feelings, had made a strong impression on his mind. For, naturally enough, it must have pained him to hear the Emperor he so devotedly loved and served spoken of in that depreciating manner.
"The name of Monsieur Noirtier," interposed Maximilian, "is celebrated throughout Europe. He was a statesman of high standing, and you may or may not know, Valentine, that he took a leading part in every Bonapartist conspiracy set on foot during the restoration of the Bourbons."
Oh, I have often heard whispers of things that seem to me most strange. The father a Bonapartist, the son a Royalist. What can have been the reason of so singular a difference in parties and politics? But to resume my story, I turned towards my grandfather, as though to question him as to the cause of his emotion. He looked expressively at the newspaper I had been reading. "What is the matter, dear grandfather?" said I. "Are you pleased?" He gave me a sign in the affirmative. "With what my father said just now?" He returned a sign in the negative. "Perhaps you liked what Monsieur Danglars said?" Another sign in the negative. "Oh, then, you were glad to hear that Monsieur Morel," I didn't dare to say Maximilian, "had been made an officer of the Legion of Honor?" He signified assent. "Only think of the poor old man's being so pleased to think that you, who were a perfect stranger to him, had been made an officer of the Legion of Honor. Perhaps it was a mere whim on his part, for he is falling, they say, into second childhood. But I love him for showing so much interest in you."
"How singular," murmured Maximilian. "Your father hates me, while your grandfather, on the contrary. What strange feelings are aroused by politics!"
"Hush!" cried Valentine suddenly. "Someone is coming."
Maximilian leaped at one bound into his crop of lucerne, which he began to pull up in the most ruthless way, under the pretext of being occupied in weeding it.
"Mademoiselle, mademoiselle!" exclaimed a voice from behind the trees. "Madame is searching for you everywhere. There is a visitor in the drawing-room." "A visitor?" inquired Valentine, much agitated. "Who is it?" "Some grand personage, a prince. I believe they said the Count of Monte Cristo." "I will come directly," cried Valentine aloud.
The name of Monte Cristo sent an electric shock through the young man on the other side of the iron gate, to whom Valentine's "I am coming" was the customary signal of farewell. "Now then," said Maximilian, leaning on the handle of his spade, "I would give a good deal to know how it comes about that the Count of Monte Cristo is acquainted with Monsieur de Villefort." End of chapter 51. Chapter 52. Toxicology. It was really the Count of Monte Cristo who had just arrived at Madame de Villefort's for the purpose of returning the procureur's visit, and at his name, as may be easily imagined, the whole house was in confusion. Madame de Villefort, who was alone in her drawing-room when the Count was announced, desired that her son might be brought thither instantly to renew his thanks to the Count. And Edward, who heard this great personage talked of for 2 whole days, made all possible haste to come to him, not from obedience to his mother, or out of any feeling of gratitude to the Count, but from sheer curiosity, and that some chance remark might give him the opportunity for making one of the impertinent speeches which made his mother say, "Oh, that naughty child, but I can't be severe with him. He is really so bright." After the usual civilities, the Count inquired after Monsieur de Villefort. "My husband dines with the Chancellor," replied the young lady. "He has just gone, and I am sure he'll be exceedingly sorry not to have had the pleasure of seeing you before he went." 2 visitors, who were there when the Count arrived, having gazed at him with all their eyes, retired after that reasonable delay which politeness admits and curiosity requires. "What is your sister Valentine doing?" inquired Madame de Villefort of Edward.
Tell someone to bid her come here, that I may have the honor of introducing her to the Count."
"You have a daughter, then, madame?" inquired the Count. "Very young, I presume."
"The daughter of Monsieur de Villefort by his first marriage," replied the young wife. "A fine, well-grown girl."
"But melancholy," interrupted Master Edward, snatching the feathers out of the tail of a splendid paroquet that was screaming on its gilded perch in order to make a plume for his hat. Madame de Villefort merely cried,
"Be still, Edward." She then added, "This young madcap is, however, very nearly right, and merely re-echoes what he has heard me say with pain 100 times. For Mademoiselle de Villefort is, in spite of all we can do to rouse her, of a melancholy disposition and taciturn habit, which frequently injure the effect of her beauty. But what detains her? Go, Edward, and see."
"Because they are looking for her where she is not to be found."
"And where are you looking for her?"
"With Grandpa Noirtier."
"And do you think she is not there?"
"No, no, 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 she is not there," replied Edward, singing his words.
"And where is she, then?
If you know, why don't you tell?"
"She is under the big chestnut tree," replied the spoiled brat,
as he gave, in spite of his mother's commands, live flies to the parrot, which seemed keenly to relish such fare. Madame de Villefort stretched out her hand to ring, intending to direct her waiting-maid to the spot where she would find Valentine, when the young lady herself entered the apartment. She appeared much dejected, and any person who considered her attentively might have observed the traces of recent tears in her eyes. Valentine, whom we have in the rapid march of our narrative presented to our readers without formally introducing her, was a tall and graceful girl of 19, with bright chestnut hair, deep blue eyes, and that reposeful air of quiet distinction which characterized her mother. Her white and slender fingers, her pearly neck, her cheeks tinted with varying hues, reminded one of the lovely Englishwomen who have been so poetically compared in their manner to the gracefulness of a swan. She entered the apartment, and seeing near her stepmother the stranger of whom she had already heard so much, saluted him without any girlish awkwardness, or even lowering her eyes, and with an elegance that redoubled the Count's attention. He rose to return the salutation.
"Mademoiselle de Villefort, my daughter-in-law," said Madame de Villefort to Monte Cristo,
leaning back on her sofa and motioning towards Valentine with her hand.
"And Monsieur de Monte Cristo, King of China, Emperor of Cochin China," said the young imp, looking slyly towards his sister.
Madame de Villefort at this really did turn pale, and was very nearly angry with this household plague who answered to the name of Edward. But the Count, on the contrary, smiled and appeared to look at the boy complacently, which caused the maternal heart to bound again with joy and enthusiasm. "But, madame," replied the Count, continuing the conversation, and looking by turns at Madame de Villefort and Valentine, "have I not already had the honour of meeting yourself and mademoiselle before? I could not help thinking so just now. The idea came over my mind, and as mademoiselle entered, the sight of her was an additional ray of light thrown on a confused remembrance. Excuse the remark."
"I do not think it likely, sir. Mademoiselle de Villefort is not very fond of society, and we very seldom go out," said the young lady.
"Then it was not in society that I met with mademoiselle or yourself, madame, or this charming little merry boy. Besides, the Parisian world is entirely unknown to me, for, as I believe I told you, I have been in Paris for very few days. No, but perhaps you will permit me to call to mind— Stay." The Count placed his hand on his brow as if to collect his thoughts. "No, it was somewhere away from here.
It was, I do not know, but it appears that this recollection is connected with a lovely sky and some religious fête. Mademoiselle was holding flowers in her hand. The interesting boy was chasing a beautiful peacock in a garden, and you, madame, were under the trellis of some arbour. Pray, come to my aid, madame. Do not these circumstances appeal to your memory?" "No, indeed," replied Madame de Villefort, "and yet it appears to me, sir, that if I had met you anywhere, the recollection of you must have been imprinted on my memory." "Perhaps the Count saw us in Italy," said Valentine timidly. "Yes, in Italy. It was in Italy, most probably," replied Monte Cristo. "You have travelled, then, in Italy, mademoiselle?" "Yes, Madame and I were there 2 years ago. The doctors, anxious for my lungs, prescribed the air of Naples. We went by Bologna, Perugia, and Rome." "Ah, yes, true, mademoiselle," exclaimed Monte Cristo, as if this simple explanation was sufficient to revive the recollection he sought. "It was at Perugia, on Corpus Christi Day, in the garden of the Hôtel des Postes, when chance brought us together, you, Madame de Villefort, and her son. I now remember having had the honour of meeting you." "I perfectly well remember Perugia, sir, and the Hôtel des Postes, and the festival of which you speak," said Madame de Villefort. "But in vain do I tax my memory, of whose treachery I am ashamed, for I really do not recall to mind that I ever had the pleasure of seeing you before." "It is strange, but neither do I recollect meeting with you," observed Valentine, raising her beautiful eyes to the Count. "But I remember it perfectly," interposed the darling Edward. "I will assist your memory, madame," continued the Count. "The day had been burning hot. You were waiting for horses which were delayed in consequence of the festival. Mademoiselle was walking in the shade of the garden, and your son disappeared in pursuit of the peacock." "And I caught it, mamma, don't you remember?" interposed Edward. "And I pulled 3 such beautiful feathers out of his tail." "You, madame, remained under the arbour. Do you not remember that while you were seated on a stone bench, and while, as I told you, Mademoiselle de Villefort and your young son were absent, you conversed for a considerable time with somebody?" "Yes, in truth, yes," answered the young lady, turning very red. "I do remember conversing with a person wrapped in a long woollen mantle. He was a medical man, I think." "Precisely so, madame. This man was myself for a fortnight. I had been at the hotel, during which period I had cured my valet de chambre of a fever, and my landlord of the jaundice, so that I really acquired a reputation as a skilful physician. We discoursed a long time, madame, on different subjects, of Perugino, of Raffaele, of manners, customs, of the famous Aqua Tofana, of which they had told you, I think you said, that certain individuals in Perugia had preserved the secret." "Yes, true," replied Madame de Villefort, somewhat uneasily. "I remember now." "I do not recollect now all the various subjects of which we discoursed, madame," continued the Count with perfect calmness, "but I perfectly remember that, falling into the error which others have entertained respecting me, you consulted me as to the health of Mademoiselle de Villefort." "Yes, really, sir, you were in fact a medical man," said Madame de Villefort, "since you had cured the sick." "Molière or Beaumarchais would reply to you, madame, that it was precisely because I was not that I had cured my patients for myself. I am content to say to you that I have studied chemistry and the natural sciences somewhat deeply, but still only as an amateur, you understand." At this moment the clock struck 6. "It is 6 o'clock," said Madame de Villefort, evidently agitated. "Valentine, Will you not go and see if your grandpapa will have his dinner?"
Valentine rose, and saluting the Count, left the apartment without speaking.
"Oh, madame," said the Count, where Valentine had left the room, "was it on my account that you sent Mademoiselle de Villefort away?" "By no means," replied the young lady quickly, "but this is the hour when we usually give Monsieur Noirtier the unwelcome meal that sustains his pitiful existence. You are aware, sir, of the deplorable condition of my husband's father." "Yes, madame. Monsieur de Villefort spoke of it to me. A paralysis, I think." "Alas, yes. The poor old gentleman is entirely helpless. The mind alone is still active in this human machine, and that is faint and flickering, like the light of a lamp about to expire. But excuse me, sir, for talking of our domestic misfortunes. I interrupted you at the moment when you were telling me that you were a skilful chemist." "No, madame, I did not say as much as that," replied the Count with a smile. "Quite the contrary. I have studied chemistry because, having determined to live in Eastern climates, I have been desirous of following the example of King Mithridates." "Mithridates Rex Ponticus," said the young scamp as he tore some beautiful portraits out of a splendid album. "The individual who took cream in his cup of poison every morning at breakfast." "Edward, you naughty boy!" exclaimed Madame de Villefort, snatching the mutilated book from the urchin's grasp. "You are positively past bearing. You really disturb the conversation. Go, leave us, and join your sister Valentine in dear Grandpapa Noirtier's room." "The album?" said Edward sulkily. "What do you mean, the album?" "I want the album." "How dare you tear out the drawings?" "Oh, it amuses me." "Go at once." "I won't go unless you give me the album," said the boy, seating himself doggedly in an armchair, according to his habit of never giving way. "Take it, then, and pray disturb us no longer," said Madame de Villefort, giving the album to Edward, who then went towards the door, led by his mother. The Count followed her with his eyes. "Let us see if she shuts the door after him," he muttered. Madame de Villefort closed the door carefully after the child. The Count, appearing not to notice her, then casting a scrutinizing glance around the chamber, the young wife returned to her chair, in which she seated herself. "Allow me to observe, madame," said the Count, with that kind tone he could assume so well. "You are really very severe with that dear, clever child." "Oh, sometimes severity is quite necessary," replied Madame de Villefort, with all a mother's real firmness. "It was his Cornelius Nepos that Master Edward was repeating when he referred to King Mithridates," continued the Count, "and you interrupted him in a quotation which proves that his tutor has by no means neglected him, for your son is really advanced for his years." "The fact is, Count," answered the mother, agreeably flattered, "he has great aptitude, and learns all that is set before him. He has but one fault. He is somewhat wilful. But really, on referring for the moment to what he said, do you truly believe that Mithridates used these precautions, and that these precautions were efficacious?" "I think so, madame, because I myself have made use of them, that I might not be poisoned at Naples, at Palermo, and at Smyrna. That is to say, on 3 several occasions when, but for these precautions, I must have lost my life." "And your precautions were successful?" "Completely so." "Yes, I remember now you mentioning to me at Perugia something of this sort." "Indeed?" said the Count with an air of surprise, remarkably well counterfeited. "I really did not remember." "I inquired of you if poisons acted equally and with the same effect on men of the north as on men of the south, and you answered me that the cold and sluggish habits of the north did not present the same aptitude as the rich and energetic temperaments of the natives of the south."
"And that is the case," observed Monte Cristo. "I have seen Russians devour, without being visibly inconvenienced, vegetable substances which would infallibly have killed a Neapolitan or an Arab."
"And you really believe the result would be still more sure with us than in the East, and in the midst of our fogs and rains a man would habituate himself more easily than in a warm latitude to the progressive absorption of poison?"
"Certainly, it being at the same time perfectly understood that he should have been duly fortified against the poison to which he had not been accustomed."
"Yes, I understand that. And how would you habituate yourself, for instance, or rather, how did you habituate yourself to it?"
"Oh, very easily. Suppose you knew beforehand the poison that would be made use of against you. Suppose the poison was, for instance, brucine."
"Brucine is extracted from the false Angostura, is it not?" inquired Madame de Villefort.
"Precisely, madame," replied Monte Cristo. "But I perceive I have not much to teach you. Allow me to compliment you on your knowledge. Such learning is very rare among ladies."
"Oh, I am aware of that," said Madame de Villefort, "but I have a passion for the occult sciences, which speak to the imagination like poetry and are reducible to figures like an algebraic equation. But go on, I beg of you. What you say interests me to the greatest degree."
"Well," replied Monte Cristo, "suppose, then, that this poison was brucine, and you were to take a milligram the first day, 2 milligrams the second day, and so on. Well, at the end of 10 days you would have taken a centigram. At the end of 20 days, increasing another milligram, you would have taken 300 centigrams. That is to say, a dose which you would support without inconvenience, and which would be very dangerous for any other person who had not taken the same precautions as yourself. Well, then, at the end of a month, when drinking water from the same carafe, you would kill the person who drank with you, without your perceiving, otherwise than from slight inconvenience, that there was any poisonous substance mingled with this water."
"Do you know any other counter-poisons?"
"I do not."
"I have often read and read again the history of Mithridates," said Madame de Villefort in a tone of reflection, "and had always considered it a fable."
"No, madame, contrary to most history, it is true. But what you tell me, madame, what you inquire of me, is not the result of a chance query. For 2 years ago you asked me the same questions, and said then that for a very long time this history of Mithridates had occupied your mind."
"True, sir. The 2 favorite studies of my youth were botany and mineralogy, and subsequently, when I learned that the use of simples frequently explained the whole history of a people and the entire life of individuals in the East, as flowers betoken and symbolize a love affair, I have regretted that I was not a man, that I might have been a Flamel, a Fontana, or a Cabanis."
"And the more, madame," said Monte Cristo, "as the Orientals do not confine themselves, as did Mithridates, to make a cuirass of his poisons, but they also made them a dagger. Science becomes in their hands not only a defensive weapon, but still more frequently an offensive one. The one serves against all their physical sufferings, the other against all their enemies. With opium, belladonna, brucea, snakewood, and the cherry laurel, they put to sleep all who stand in their way. There is not one of those women, Egyptian, Turkish, or Greek, whom here you call good women, who do not know how, by means of chemistry, to stupefy a doctor, and in psychology to amaze a confessor." "Really?" said Madame de Villefort, whose eyes sparkled with strange fire at this conversation. "Oh, yes, indeed, madame," continued Monte Cristo. "The secret dramas of the East begin with a love philtre and end with a death potion, begin with paradise and end with hell. There are as many elixirs of every kind as there are caprices and peculiarities in the physical and moral nature of humanity. And I will say further, the art of these chemists is capable with the utmost precision to accommodate and proportion the remedy and the bane to yearnings for love or desires for vengeance."
"But, sir," remarked the young woman, "these Eastern societies, in the midst of which you have passed a portion of your existence, are as fantastic as the tales that come from their strange land. A man can easily be put out of the way there. Then it is indeed the Baghdad and Bassors of the 1001 Nights. The sultans and viziers who rule over society there, and who constitute what in France we call the gouvernement, are really Haroun al-Rashids and Glafars, who not only pardon a poisoner, but even make him a prime minister, if his crime has been an ingenious one, and who under such circumstance have the whole story written in letters of gold to divert their hours of idleness and ennui."
"By no means, madame. The fanciful exists no longer in the East. There, disguised under other names, and concealed under other costumes, are police agents, magistrates, attorneys general, and bailiffs. They hang, behead, and impale their criminals in the most agreeable possible manner. But some of these, like clever rogues, have contrived to escape human justice and succeed in their fraudulent enterprises by cunning stratagems. Amongst us a simpleton possessed by the demon of hate or cupidity, who has an enemy to destroy or some near relation to dispose of, goes straight to the grocers or druggists, gives a false name, which leads more easily to his detection than his real one, and under the pretext that the rats prevent him from sleeping, purchases 5 or 6 grams of arsenic. If he is really a cunning fellow, he goes to 5 or 6 different druggists or grocers, and thereby becomes only 5 or 6 times more easily traced. Then, when he has acquired his specific, he administers duly to his enemy, or near kinsman, a dose of arsenic, which would make a mammoth or mastodon burst, and which, without rhyme or reason, makes his victim utter groans which alarm the entire neighbourhood. Then arrive a crowd of policemen and constables. They fetch a doctor, who opens the dead body and collects from the entrails and stomach a quantity of arsenic in a spoon. Next day 100 newspapers relate the fact, with the names of the victim and the murderer. The same evening the grocer or grocers, druggists or droggists come and say, "It was I who sold the arsenic to the gentleman." And rather than not recognize the guilty purchaser, they will recognize 20. Then the foolish criminal is taken, imprisoned, interrogated, confronted, confounded, condemned, and cut off by hemp or steel, or if she be a woman of any consideration, they lock her up for life. This is the way in which you Northerns understand chemistry, madame. Derues was, however, I must confess, more skilful.
"What would you have, sir?" said the lady, laughing. "We do what we can. All the world has not the secret of the Medicis or the Borgias."
"Now," replied the Count, shrugging his shoulders, "shall I tell you the cause of all these stupidities? It is because, at your theatres, by what at least I could judge by reading the pieces they play, they see persons swallow the contents of a phial, or suck the button of a ring and fall dead instantly. 5 minutes afterwards the curtain falls, and the spectators depart. They are ignorant of the consequences of the murder. They see neither the police commissary with his badge of office, nor the corporal with his 4 men, and so the poor fools believe that the whole thing is as easy as lying. But go a little way from France. Go either to Aleppo or Cairo, or only to Naples or Rome, and you will see people passing by you in the streets, people erect, smiling, and fresh-coloured, of whom Asmodeus, if you were holding on by the skirt of his mantle, would say, "That man was poisoned 3 weeks ago. He will be a dead man in a month."
"Then," remarked Madame de Villefort, "they have again discovered the secret of the famous aqua tofana that they said was lost at Perugia."
"Ah, but, madame, does mankind ever lose anything? The arts change about and make a tour of the world. Things take a different name, and the vulgar do not follow them. That is all. But there is always the same result. Poisons act particularly on some organ or another. One on the stomach, another on the brain, another on the intestines. Well, the poison brings on a cough, the cough an inflammation of the lungs, or some other complaint catalogued in the book of science, which, however, by no means precludes it from being decidedly mortal, and if it were not, would be sure to become so, thanks to the remedies applied by foolish doctors, who are generally bad chemists, and which will act in favour of or against the malady, as you please. And then there is a human being killed according to all the rules of art and skill, and of whom justice learns nothing, as was said by a terrible chemist of my acquaintance, the worthy Abbé Adelmonte of Taormina in Sicily, who has studied these national phenomena very profoundly."
"It is quite frightful, but deeply interesting," said the young lady, motionless with attention. "I thought, I must confess, that these tales were inventions of the Middle Ages."
"Yes, no doubt, but improved upon by ours. What is the use of time, rewards of merit, medals, crosses, Monthyon prizes, if they do not lead society towards one more complete perfection? Yet man will never be perfect until he learns to create and destroy. He does know how to destroy, and that is half the battle."
"So," added Madame de Villefort, constantly returning to her object, "the poisons of the Borgias, the Medicis, the Rennes, the Ruggieris, and later probably that of Baron de Trenck, whose story has been so misused by modern drama and romance—"
"Were objects of art, madame, and nothing more," replied the count. "Do you suppose that the real savant addresses himself stupidly to the mere individual? By no means. Science loves eccentricities, leaps and bounds, trials of strength, fancies, if I may be allowed so to term them. Thus, for instance, the excellent Abbé Adelmonte, of whom I spoke just now, made in this way some marvellous experiments."
"Really?"
"Yes, I will mention one to you. He had a remarkably fine garden, full of vegetables, flowers, and fruit. From amongst these vegetables he selected the most simple, a cabbage, for instance. For 3 days he watered this cabbage with a distillation of arsenic. On the 3rd, the cabbage began to droop and turn yellow. At that moment he cut it. In the eyes of everybody it seemed fit for table, and preserved its wholesome appearance. It was only poisoned to the Abbé Adelmonte. He then took the cabbage to the room where he had rabbits, for the Abbé Adelmonte had a collection of rabbits, cats, and guinea pigs, fully as fine as his collection of vegetables, flowers, and fruit. Well, the Abbé Adelmonte took a rabbit, and made it eat a leaf of the cabbage. The rabbit died. What magistrate would find or even venture to insinuate anything against this? What procureur has ever ventured to draw up an accusation against Monsieur Magendie or Monsieur Flourens in consequence of the rabbits, cats, and guinea pigs they have killed? Not one. So then, the rabbit dies, and justice takes no notice. This rabbit dead, the Abbé Adelmonte has its entrails taken out by his cook and thrown on the dunghill. On this dunghill is a hen, who, pecking these intestines, is in her turn taken ill, and dies the next day. At the moment when she is struggling in the convulsions of death, a vulture is flying by. There are a good many vultures in Adelmonte's country. This bird darts on the dead fowl, and carries it away to a rock, where it dines off its prey. 3 days afterwards, this poor vulture, which has been very much indisposed since that dinner, suddenly feels very giddy while flying aloft in the clouds, and falls heavily into a fish-pond. The pike, eels, and carp eat greedily always, as everybody knows. Well, they feast on the vulture. Now suppose that next day one of these eels, or pike, or carp, poisoned at the 4th remove, is served up at your table. Well then, your guest will be poisoned at the 5th remove, and die at the end of 8 or 10 days of pains in the intestines, sickness, or abscesses of the pylorus. The doctors open the body, and say with an air of profound learning, "The subject has died of a tumour on the liver, or of typhoid fever." "But," remarked Madame de Villefort, "all these circumstances, which you link thus to one another, may be broken by the least accident. The vulture may not see the fowl, or may fall 100 yards from the fish-pond." "Ah, that is where the art comes in. To be a great chemist in the East, one must direct chance, and this is to be achieved." Madame de Villefort was in deep thought, yet listened attentively. "But," she exclaimed suddenly, "arsenic is indelible, indestructible. In whatsoever way it is absorbed, it will be found again in the body of the victim from the moment when it was being taken, and sufficient quantity to cause death." "Precisely so," cried Monte Cristo. "Precisely so, and this is what I say to my worthy Adelmonte." He reflected, smiled, and replied to me by a Sicilian proverb, which I believe is also a French proverb. "My son, the world was not made in a day, but in 7. Return on Sunday." On the Sunday following, I did return to him. Instead of having watered his cabbage with arsenic, he had watered it this time with a solution of salts. Having their basis in strychnine strychnos colubrina, as the learned term it. Now the cabbage had not the slightest appearance of disease in the world, and the rabbit had not the smallest distrust, yet 5 minutes afterwards the rabbit was dead. The fowl pecked at the rabbit, and the next day was a dead hen. This time we were the vultures, so we opened the bird, and this time all special symptoms had disappeared. There were only general symptoms. There was no peculiar indication in any organ, an excitement of the nervous system. That was it. A case of cerebral congestion. Nothing more. The fowl had not been poisoned. She had died of apoplexy. Apoplexy is a rare disease among fowls, I believe, but very common among men. Madame de Villefort appeared more and more thoughtful. "It is very fortunate," she observed, "that such substance could only be prepared by chemists. Otherwise, all the world would be poisoning each other." "By chemists and persons who have a taste for chemistry," said Monte Cristo carelessly. "And then," said Madame de Villefort, endeavouring by a struggle and with effort to get away from her thoughts.
"However skilfully it is prepared, crime is always crime, and if it avoids human scrutiny, it does not escape the eye of God. The Orientals are stronger than we are in the case of conscience, and very prudently have no hell. That is the point."
"Really, madam, this is a scruple which naturally must occur to a pure mind like yours, but which would easily yield before sound reasoning. The bad side of human thought will always be defined by the paradox of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. You remember, the Mandarin who is killed 500 leagues off by raising the tip of the finger. Man's whole life passes in doing these things, and his intellect is exhausted by reflecting on them. You will find very few persons who will go and brutally thrust a knife in the heart of a fellow creature, or will administer to him, in order to remove him from the surface of the globe on which we move with life and animation, that quantity of arsenic of which we just now talked. Such a thing is really out of rule, eccentric or stupid. To attain such a point, the blood must be heated to 36 degrees, the pulse be at least at 90, and the feelings excited beyond the ordinary limit. But suppose one pass, as it permissible in philology, from the word itself to its softened synonym. Then, instead of committing an ignoble assassination, you make an elimination. You merely and simply remove from your path the individual who is in your way, and that without shock or violence, without the display of the sufferings which, in the case of becoming a punishment, make a martyr of the victim, and a butcher, in every sense of the word, of him who inflicts them. Then there will be no blood, no groans, no convulsions, and, above all, no consciousness of that horrid and compromising moment of accomplishing the act. Then one escapes the clutch of the human law, which says, "Do not disturb society." This is the mode in which they manage these things, and succeed in Eastern climes, where there are grave and phlegmatic persons who care very little for the questions of time in conjunctures of importance.
"Yet conscience remains," remarked Madame de Villefort in an agitated voice, and with a stifled sigh.
"Yes," answered Monte Cristo. "Happily, yes, conscience does remain, and if it did not, how wretched we should be. After every action requiring exertion, it is conscience that saves us, for it supplies us with 1,000 good excuses, of which we alone are judges, and these reasons, howsoever excellent in producing sleep, would avail us but very little before a tribunal, when we were tried for our lives. Thus Richard III, for instance, was marvellously served by his conscience after the putting away of the 2 children of Edward IV. In fact, he could say, "These 2 children of a cruel and persecuting king, who have inherited the vices of their father, which I alone could perceive in their juvenile propensities. These 2 children are impediments in my way of promoting the happiness of the English people, whose unhappiness they, the children, would infallibly have caused. Thus was Lady Macbeth served by her conscience, when she sought to give her son, and not her husband, whatever Shakespeare may say, a throne. Ah, maternal love is a great virtue, a powerful motive, so powerful that it excuses a multitude of things, even if, after Duncan's death, Lady Macbeth had been at all pricked by her conscience." Madame de Villefort listened with avidity to these appalling maxims and horrible paradoxes, delivered by the Count with that ironical simplicity which was peculiar to him. After a moment's silence, the lady inquired,
"Do you know, my dear Count," she said, "that you are a very terrible reasoner, and that you look at the world through a somewhat distempered medium. Have you really measured the world by scrutinies, or through alembics and crucibles? For you must indeed be a great chemist, and the elixir you administered to my son, which recalled him to life almost instantaneously—" "Oh, do not place any reliance on that, madame. One drop of that elixir suffered to recall life to a dying child, but 3 drops would have impelled the blood into his lungs in such a way as to have produced most violent palpitations. 6 would have suspended his respiration and caused syncope more serious than that in which he was. 10 would have destroyed him. You know, madam, how suddenly I snatched him from those phials which he so imprudently touched." "Is it then so terrible a poison?" "Oh, no. In the first place, let us agree that the word poison does not exist, because in medicine use is made of the most violent poisons, which become, according as they are employed, most salutary remedies." "What then is it?" "A skilful preparation of my friends the worthy Abbé Adelmonte, who taught me the use of it." "Oh," observed Madame de Villefort, "it must be an admirable antispasmodic." "Perfect, madame, as you have seen," replied the Count, "and I frequently make use of it with all possible prudence, though be it observed," he added with a smile of intelligence. "Most assuredly," responded Madame de Villefort in the same tone. "As for me, so nervous and so subject to fainting fits, I would require a Dr. Adelmonte to invent for me some means of breathing freely and tranquilizing my mind, in the fear I have of dying some fine day of suffocation. In the meanwhile, as the thing is difficult to find in France, and your abbé is not probably disposed to make a journey to Paris on my account, I must continue to use Monsieur Planche's antispasmodics, and mint and Hoffman's drops are among my favorite remedies. Here are some lozenges which I have made up on purpose. They are compounded doubly strong." Monte Cristo opened the tortoise-shell box which the lady presented to him, and inhaled the odour of the lozenges with the air of an amateur who thoroughly appreciated their composition. "They are indeed exquisite," he said, "but as they are necessarily submitted to the process of deglutition, a function which is frequently impossible for a fainting person to accomplish, I prefer my own specific." "Undoubtedly, and so should I prefer it, after the effects I have seen produced. But of course it is a secret, and I am not so indiscreet as to ask it of you." "But I," said Monte Cristo, rising as he spoke, "I am gallant enough to offer it to you." "How kind you are!" "Only remember one thing. A small dose is a remedy, a large one is a poison. 1 drop will restore life, as you have seen. 5 or 6 will inevitably kill, and in a way the more terrible inasmuch as, poured into a glass of wine, it would not in the slightest degree affect its flavour. But I say no more, madame. It is really as if I were prescribing for you." The clock struck 6:30, and the lady was announced, a friend of Madame de Villefort, who came to dine with her. "If I had the honour of seeing you for the 3rd or 4th time, Count, instead of only for the 2nd," said Madame de Villefort, "if I had had the honour of being your friend, instead of only having the happiness of being under an obligation to you, I should insist on detaining you to dinner, and not allow myself to be daunted by a first refusal." "1,000 thanks, madame," replied Monte Cristo, "but I have an engagement which I cannot break. I have promised to escort to the Academy a Greek princess of my acquaintance, who has never seen your grand opera, and who relies on me to conduct her thither." Adieu, then, sir, and do not forget the prescription."
"Ah, in truth, madame, to do that I must forget the hour's conversation I have had with you, which is indeed impossible." Monte Cristo bowed and left the house. Madame de Villefort remained immersed in thought.
"He is a very strange man," she said, "and in my opinion is himself the Adelmonte he talks about."
As to Monte Cristo, the result had surpassed his utmost expectations. "Good," said he, as he went away. "This is a fruitful soil, and I feel certain that the seed sown will not be cast on barren ground." Next morning, faithful to his promise, he sent the prescription requested. End of chapter 52.